Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second lecture in art project. Today we're going to be taking a look at the genre known as naive art and Grandma Moses. This is brought to you by the Oceanside Public Library and sponsored by the Friends of the Oceanside Public Library. And I'm Julia Pfister, the Executive Director of Studio ACE. And let's get started. So when we talk about naive art, naive art is simple, unaffected, and unsophisticated. It usually specifically refers to art made by artists who have had no formal training in an art school or in an academy. It is characterized by childlike simplicity of execution and vision. As such, it has been valued by modernists seeking to get away from what they see as the insincere sophistication of art created within the traditional system. So basically, art that has not been done by art professionals. The most famous artist, naive artist of the modern times is the artist Henri Rousseau. He was actually known as Le Douanier, which is a customs man, because that was his full-time job. So he was not a full-time artist at all. By the time of his death in 1910, Rousseau was acknowledged by Picasso and others as a naturally creative spirit. More than a decade later, his work was treasured by the Surrealists as evidence of the marvelous aspects of the unconscious. They were fascinated by his unconventional style and his obsessive imagination. And Andre Breton had a still life comparable to this one beside his desk. And it appeared to open a door into Rousseau's personal world, signaling a unique individuality. So that's kind of the whole theme of naive art is this childlike simplicity, no formal art training, unique individuality, and from the artist's imagination. So it's really things that they knew that they were painting. So what the naive artist was lacking in a professional training was that of anatomy studies, art history, technique, perspective, and ways of seeing. So we're just seeing, the artist is kind of painting what they know. So this is a recollection of the artist's seafaring days on transatlantic windjammers and steamers. And we see here that it doesn't look exactly perfect, but we certainly get the idea across of what is happening here. So it's also, naive artists were aware of fine art conventions, such as graphical perspective and compositional conventions, but they were either unable to fully use them or they chose not to. So they would have seen other paintings and how they did. But again, this is probably someone who's really painting from their, not only their heart, but also their imagination. So again, recognized for its childlike simplicity and frankness, pictures of this kind typically have a very flat rendering style with a rudimentary expression of perspective. And so we see this here in Henri Rousseau's, that it does work as a painting, but it just lacks some of that perspective and perhaps professional training that we would see with this. So another term that may be used, especially of paintings and architecture, is provincial. Essentially used for work by artists who had received some conventional training, but whose work unintentionally falls short of metropolitan or court standards or art academy standards. So around this time in the French Academy, there was very specific, you should be doing mythological paintings or history paintings or biblical paintings. And these artists were just painting what they knew or from their imagination. So John Kane was one of Grandma Moses's contemporaries. He was the first self-taught American painter in the 20th century to be recognized by a museum. He was admitted to the 1927 Carnegie International Exhibition. He attracted considerable attention from the media, which initially suspected that his success was a prank. He inadvertently paved the way for other self-taught artists such as Grandma Moses. Today, Kane is remembered for his landscapes painting of industrial Pittsburgh. many of which are held by major museums, such as the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So this was a genre that has been very much accepted and very much recognized, but just a different genre. This is another one of Grandma Moses's contemporaries. Horace Pippen was a self-taught American artist who painted in a range of themes, including scenes inspired by his service in World War I, landscapes, portraits, and biblical subjects. And some of his best known works actually address the US's history of slavery and racial segregation. He was an African-American artist. So again, we're just seeing all these different types of artists who painted what they knew and from their imagination or from reality as well, but not quite getting across the reality of the well-trained artists. So when we talk about what they're missing here, that lack of perspective is kind of that decrease size of objects as they go back in the distance, the muting of colors with distance, the decrease of the precision of details with distance. So the effects of this are kind of, the perspective is kind of maybe perhaps geometrically wrong. From the very art, from the critical standpoint, there's usually a strong use of pattern, unrefined color on all the planes of the composition. There's kind of also an equal accuracy brought to details, including those which are in the background, which normally would be shaded or faded away in a well-trained artist. So it's simplicity rather than subtlety are all supposed markers of naive art. It has, however, become such a popular and recognizable style that many examples could be called what they're calling pseudo-naive. So again, but it is recognized very much so. This is a French artist, Seraphine Lewis. She was actually inspired by her religious faith and by stained glass church windows and other religious art. Their designs were very intense, both in color and in pattern, which we'll see a lot of, and is often interpreted as a reflection of her own psyche. So again, there's this whole idea that the surrealists like that it was coming from within yourself. So nobody knows when the first naive artist appeared on the scene. As from the very first manifestations of art right up to the days of the modern classic, naive artists quite unconsciously really gave us this unmistakable signs of their creative activity. At all events, naive art can be regarded as having occupied an official position in the annals of 20th century art. And this was part of it was due to the Blue Rider Group, to Pablo Picasso. Franz Marc also was quite fond of this. So very much recognized by the official academy or trained artists as well, that they did have the creativity and imagination. So this is Maria Primachenko. She was Ukrainian and a village folk art painter and also representative of naive art. So they very much recognized her as an important artist. She also did drawing and embroidery and painted on ceramics. She was also the laureate of the National Prize of Ukraine. She was the honored artist of the USSR since 1970, and in the year 2009 was declared the Year of Maria Primachenko by UNESCO. So again, very much recognized, just a different genre. And just to kind of to show how much it has been recognized, this is actually an International Museum of Naive Art. This one is located in Nice. Again, there are works here. There's paintings, sculptures, drawings, and posters painted by all sorts of naive artists, such as Henri Rousseau, Seraphine Lewis, and Grandma Moses. There are also museums, this is not the only one, in Croatia and Brazil, in Paris as well, besides Nice, that we see here, in Hungary, in Serbia, in Spain, and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. So it become very much recognized, and certainly to have its own museums. So this is Ivan Rabuzan. He is a painter of characteristic, lyrical, and idealized landscapes. And remember, we talked about patterning, and so he very much is following that. So this is following patterning. We see that as it goes back, we don't really lose any detail, so that, and the perspective is a little bit off, but he's just using these wonderful circles to give us this beautiful landscape from his imagination. So just really beautiful work there. This is a Croatian painter. He was actually a farmer by occupation. So this to me is reminiscent of Grandma Moses, as we'll see later. His artistic talent was discovered in 1930. He became the most celebrated Yugoslav naive painter and the central figure of a group of naive painters who actually created their own school, which is kind of ironic. In the 1930s, the simple and expressive folk style and the clear colors in which he depicted peasant scenes with traditional customs, merry festivals, tragic deaths, or arduous peasant work came close to the socially critic aesthetic of the committed artists in their group. So again, just is very interesting. So again, looking at naive art, we can see, like, especially on the right-hand side, or either one of those paintings, how detailed it is even as you go back into the distance. And this is a true sign of naive art. It's kind of this bird's eye view of what's going on, something that really couldn't be seen as an actual scene, yet you know what's going on and understand what's happening. This is another artist, a Croatian artist, a winter scene. Again, we see a lot of this same characteristics, kind of very simplistic, yet very, very detailed. That's going on here. Lots of patterns with the trees, and beautiful skies and really beautiful landscapes here as well. This is Henry Vitor. This is almost kind of a combination of the last two, because all the trees have those beautiful circular patterns, yet we see the landscape going back and a little bit more realistic. Very much a quilt-like pattern going on here as well, that we'll see also in Grandma Moses. And now let's take a look at the artist herself. So Anna Mary Robertson Moses was known by her nickname, Grandma Moses. She was an American naive artist. She began painting in earnest at age 78 and is often cited as an example of an individual who successfully began a career in the arts at an advanced age. So we all have a chance. Her works have been shown and sold in the United States and abroad, and have also been marketed on greeting cards and other merchandise. And her paintings are actually displayed in the collections of many museums. Moses herself was one of 10 children. There was 5 boys and 5 girls. And she did not practice art as a child, but rather helped out on her farm in Greenwich in upstate New York. She helped with sewing, washing, cooking, and making soap. She did some decorative sewing and hooked rugs. She also painted embellishments on utilitarian objects such as pictures and vases, and even birthday cakes. At age 12, she went to work as a hired girl on a neighboring farm, and did this until the age of 27, when she met her husband, Thomas Salmon Moses. Here's a picture of the happy couple on their wedding day. After their wedding, they were to travel to North Carolina for a job, but stopped in Staunton, Virginia, and were persuaded to take over as tenants on a local farm. Grandma Moses, or Anna Mary, she fell in love with the beautiful Shenandoah Valley and would always prefer it over her native New York. They had 10 children together, only 5 of which survived infancy. They worked very hard, as they had their entire lives, and Anna Mary actually, from her own savings, bought a cow and churned butter for extra money for the family. In 1905, they moved back to New York, where, as she said, nothing has changed. She said, even the gate is still off the same hinge. They actually called their farm Mount Nebo after the biblical mountain where Moses disappeared. So I thought that was kind of fun. Unfortunately, Thomas died in 1927 of a heart attack. So in 1932, she went to help her daughter who had tuberculosis, and she actually challenged her to recreate a picture that was embroidered in yarn. So she began doing these embroidered yarn pictures for quite a while, but eventually complained to her sister Celestia that her arthritis was bothering her and it was too difficult to use the needle. Her sister suggested painting, and Grandma Moses the painter was born. And it's all of her art really is, as we look at it, go to take a look at it, there's kind of this sense of an affirmation of life, really an offering of the human spirit, of her human spirit. And it's kind of proof of that our thoughts and our feelings really are our own. They're very precious and sometimes beautiful. And this was really the essence of Grandma Moses's genius, just the expression of herself and what she knew and what she wanted to create for people. So this is her earliest recorded painting that we have. And this one actually wound up serving a practical purpose. She redid her parlor, but there was not enough wallpaper left over to put on the board that they would put in front of the fireplace during the summer when it was dormant. So it used that. And so she continued to paint as she went on and did a lot of fairs and things like that, but really did not sell a lot. In 1936 or 7, the wife of the druggist in the neighboring village of Hoosick Falls invited Moses to a women's exchange that she was organizing. And this wound up with her paintings being at the drugstore. And she was then discovered in 1938 by a New York City collector. He told her he would make her famous. In 1940, after an exhibition at a gallery in New York, she was exhibited at Gimbel's department store, and the press was charmed by her. And really, at this point in time, the legend of Grandma Moses was born. So let's take a look at some of her paintings. So again, as we talked about most of the naive artists, and we saw all the different types of, from religious and from the sea and from World War I experiences, she painted from memories. This is actually of the Shenandoah Valley, where if we remember, she actually only lived there till 1905. So she painted what was familiar to her, she painted what she remembered, and she painted about where she lived and what she did and the people around her. Unlike the Impressionist painters, she did not paint indoors, but indoors, and also painted from her memory. So, but again, she's painting the things she loves. So, and we know she loved her Shenandoah Valley. So here we just see the lovely cows. Is kind of a very simple with her starting out, as we see her paintings start to get more and more complicated as we go on. Now, the Checkered House was a local legend. It was situated along the Cambridge Turnpike, and it was an inn where stagecoach drivers had changed horses as far back as the 18th century. During the Revolutionary War, the inn served as General Baum's headquarters and field hospital. Its checkerboard front made the house very distinctive landmark that was remembered long after it burned in 1907. So Moses actually painted a number of versions of checkered houses in both winter and summer. When asked how she managed to come up with a new composition each time, she said she imagined the scene as if she were looking at it through a window. By then shifting her viewpoint slightly, she could cause the elements to fall into place differently. So she definitely had a method. She was definitely thinking about this, and again, painted what she knew, painted familiar things. But we can take a look here and really see the patterning that a lot of the naive artists use, especially with the checkered house, of course, and then with the crops in back. And we have a few more of her the checkered house painting as well. So here we see the stagecoaches coming and going, but the people are kind of really separate, and we see them all as in their own detail, not really kind of as a unified picture. But wouldn't you love to know what that man is doing in the middle of the picture, running somewhere? This is another one of the Checkered House again. Again, we see the stagecoach coming, so you can kind of see how she just put a lot of the same elements in, but just shift the perspective. Now, particularly in the early years of her career, Moses frequently chose subjects that were the staples of 19th and early 20th century illustration. Catching the turkey, part of the annual Thanksgiving ritual, was one such theme that Moses painted numerous times. As we've already seen, she painted often repeated subjects, but no two compositions were ever alike. So it's always that constant, like she said, turning her face and rearranging the elements in the composition. So Troy actually lies across the river lies across the Hudson River from Albany, which was the largest city near Grandma Moses's home in Eagle Bridge. Surviving documents suggest that for a brief period before she married, she may have worked at a factory in Troy. So a massive fire in Troy, 2 years after Moses's birth, clearly figured prominent in local lore. Moses cut out and saved a commemorative news clipping published in 1939 and used it as the basis for a series of paintings. The artist's pencil notations on the clipping indicate how she proposed to modify the vignette. The Burning of Troy in 1862, the one we see here, is actually the 5th version that she did of the subject. And it's actually, they said, quite far removed from the original clipping. So again, we see that she's learning, she's teaching herself here as she's going along. So conventional illustration tends to focus on foreground or background, but seldom on both at once. Combining these two views was one hallmark of the Grandma Moses style. Thus, in the Burning of Troy, Moses has considerably expanded the scene beyond the burning bridge, including more foreground, as well as a detailed rendering of the city in the background. So here's where she's starting, again, changing her things, but giving us more of what happened or what could have happened that day and what was going on. So pretty cool. Sugaring off was one of Grandma Moses's most popular themes. Like many of her earliest subjects, it was derived from popular illustration, but again, from things that she knew. In this case, a well-known Currier and Ives lithograph. Although Moses did at the very start of her career sometimes copy compositions verbatim, she never tried to duplicate this particular print. Rather, from the start, she freely combined elements from her primary source with vignettes from other sources and from her own imagination. Certain stock images do tend to recur in the sugaring off paintings, such as the burning cauldron, the mother pouring the maple syrup on the snow and becomes instant candy, the men with buckets, and the little sugar houses. Sugaring off dates from 1943, really at the height of Grandma Moses's first truly mature style. She had by this point in her career gained a formidable mastery of her medium. She was capable of rendering details really with pristine clarity and handled very complex compositions, as we can see here. Its sugaring off is notable for its vast assortment of disparate activities. So the idea we can see everything everywhere. And then again, displayed in this beautiful landscape. So she just wants to show us every possible thing that could go on, even though it probably wasn't all going on at once. And we also kind of see a lot of the patterning with the trees as well, and the beautiful mountains and the sky in the background, which we see often in her paintings. Moses was basically a landscape painter, but certain memories and themes demanded an indoor setting. She herself knew this, and some of her patrons encouraged her to expand her repertoire to include interiors. The subject, however, did not come easily to her. She said, "I tried that interior, but did not like it, so I erased it. That don't seem to be in my line. I like to paint something that leads me on and into the unknown, something that I want to see away on beyond. Well, maybe I'll try again." So despite her difficulties with the subject, Moses did paint a number of striking interiors. Without the landscape to anchor her, though, she really relied on the patterning here to give a sense of realism. And we can really kind of see that here in the quilting bee with the pattern of the quilt, the patterns on the table with the plates and the chairs and the way it was done. But if we look through the windows, we can see her landscape has still come out. So she got a little bit of it in there for this one. So the village of Hoosick Falls will always have a key place in the biography of Grandma Moses. It was here that her paintings were first discovered, sitting in Thomas's drugstore window, and it is here that the artist is buried. For Moses herself, however, the importance of Hoosick Falls lay not in its connection to her own career, but in the village's role in American history. Today, Hoosick Falls, the closest real town to the Moses farmstead, is really a really sleepy hamlet, somewhat passed over by modern economic development. However, until the Great Depression, it was a bustling commercial center. Its industrial potential bolstered by its situation at the confluence of the Hoosick and Walloomsac rivers. Moses associated the area, which were the hunting grounds of the Mohican Indian tribe, with the tales of James Fenimore Cooper. She said, "Some say Natty Bumppo sleeps his sleep in an unknown grave in the village limits." So she painted a number of Hoosick Falls, showing the village in various seasons. So you can kind of follow the path of the Hoosick River there, and you can see the train. We'll see that in several of her paintings. And again, it's this whole idea of a bird's eye view of looking down on things you really couldn't look down on. She's encompassing more that would be visible from any single human vantage point. But this was very typical of Grandma Moses's approach. So many people actually think of apples as a New England commodity, but apple butter making is actually a handful of paintings that Moses did based on Virginia memories. The house in the picture is the Dudley Place, one of several farms that the Moses family occupied as tenants during their years down south. Late summer was the time for apple butter making, Moses wrote in her autobiography. The apple butter was considered a necessity. And also in her autobiography, she included a lot of recipes too, if you have a chance to take a look at that. And here's just a couple more, the early springtime on the farm. So again, we start to see these familiar themes where we see the barn on the left, that's very close up, or even the one on the right, many details, but the same is so with the barn in the far distance. So this idea that you could see everything. So the thunderstorm illustrates how Grandma Moses managed to combine these ideas of natural phenomena with dramatic detail as well. Or other things going on in here. So there's a lot of levels of action going on here in the thunderstorm. So we have the storm coming in, and we see the sky changing because of that. We see the wind blowing, and you can and see that, see the storm coming in that way. In the front, we see people running around, some seemingly doing nothing. The children's aren't even doing, aren't reacting at all. It's all the adults doing this. So you're kind of seeing all this at once, but kind of in a separate form and wanting to convey everything. So if Moses took anecdotal vignettes from newspaper and magazine clippings, her painting technique was largely derived from her experiences with embroidery. So like all women born in the day, when store-bought clothes were a rare luxury, Moses had learned to sew in early childhood. Her first sustained pictorial efforts were actually undertaken with yarn, as we found out. And she gave up making these yarns, but did sometimes try to treat the paint as yarn. But one of the most different aspects between working with yarn and paint is that yarn makes it impossible to blend colors. So she would have to put the colors next to each other, almost kind of like pointillism, putting the yellow dot and the blue dot together, and your eye would make it green. So she would kind of do the same things even with her paint. And this way of working translated into what some have characterized as Moses's impressionistic handling of paint. In Hoosick Valley, here from the window, we see these varied tones of green and yellow are set next to one another to evoke the interplay between the patched meadows and the verdant hills. So she really kind of learned from this, and we can particularly see that in the curtain. It looks almost transparent, but it's really just the little dots that are there as well. She also used certain details, especially in the background, and used a lot of paint to kind of raise it up to give it more attention as well. And many of Moses's paintings, when viewed up close, are actually composites, look like composites of abstract forms. So, because if you did just take the middle of it and not all of her details or the people, it might look very abstract, which is, again, the artist learning and growing herself, teaching herself. So this painting, A Beautiful World, represents Grandma Moses's view of an ideal harmony between humankind and nature. "I like pretty things the best," Moses once told an interviewer. "What's the use of painting a picture if it isn't something nice? So I think real hard till I think of something real pretty, and then I paint it. I like to paint old-time things, historical landmarks of long ago, bridges, mills, and hostelries. Those old-time homes, there are a few left, and they are going fast. I do them all from memory. Most of them are daydreams, as it were." So from her own mouth, that these came from her imagination. And again, here's another one. I think this just really reminiscent of the quilt work. And here you can see how would the land actually go like that, but it just gives this idea of all the different colors and patches of land that she's seeing. And here's another great one of the laundry. And here again, we can see nature coming in, looks like it's starting to rain, the wind is blowing. And here they are coming in, trying to get the laundry off the line before it starts to rain. So again, just all these wonderful images that she knows and is familiar with. And here's another one. Is this another sugar? This is morning day on the farm. And again, just the idea of all these different things that are happening that might be going on at the farm at the same time. And again, and putting it in this wonderful landscape. And this is another beautiful one. This is a fun one. This is actually Halloween. So one kind of done at night, which we haven't really seen before. So, but the moon there provides kind of our daylight to be able to see it. But we see the mountains differently, and that kind of with the white lights on them, and all the things that might go on at Halloween in Hoosick Falls. So Moses's paintings, as I said, are displayed in many museums around the world. This sugaring off painting actually sold for 1.2 million in 2006. So she has also become a very valuable artist to collect, and her paintings continue to grow in value, especially recognizing kind of her expertise in naive art. And here's another beautiful one. This is the Eagle Bridge Motel from that little village that she lived very close to. We can see the train there going by, and just all the different things that are happening here. And this is almost kind of different than some of her other ones. So we're in her later years and kind of starting to combine humanity and nature. So it looks a little more cohesive and a little more perspective. So she's really learning as she goes. So Grandma Moses was also open to new challenges. She resisted attempts by outsiders to dictate to her in terms of style or subject matter. "Someone has asked me to paint biblical pictures," she once noted, "and I say no. I'll not paint something that we know nothing about. Might as well paint something that will happen 1,000 years hence." So again, she's going to do what she wants to and keeps her mind. I just love that. So she always usually wanted to stick basically to the facts, even though they were from her memory and imagination. It was still real things that she was seeing. But she did accede to a request to illustrate Clement Moore's famous poem, The Night Before Christmas. Just as she rose and ultimately mastered the challenge of painting indoors, Moses, even at the age of 100, was ready to risk something completely untried. Unfortunately, she did not see this published. It appeared in 1962 and remained more or less continuously in print for the next 3 decades. Many of the Night Before Christmas illustrations followed the text of the poem, but this is actually pure fantasy on Moses's part, this particular painting. It was not actually published in the original edition of the book, but is in many ways a quintessential Christmas scene by an artist who was famous for such subjects. Unlike most of Moses's snowscapes, which are clearly grounded in nature, the blue background of So Long Next Year, this painting really immediately informs us that we are in the realm of imagination. The scenery is etched on the background in this kind of beautiful frosty filigree, kind of like icicles on a window. And this painting really demonstrates Moses's exceptional flexibility and versatility at age 101. So kind of just an amazing, amazing artist. So she painted well into her 101st year, although during the last few months of her life, she was too weak to do any work. This was considered to be her last finished picture and represents her old age in all its glory. Paint color and handling has kind of become a little more wild, a little more looser. The figural vignettes, once so clearly set off from the landscape, remember those would all be in front and the landscape in back, kind of merge here with the surrounding. And so this is nature and humankind are finally at one. So it really looks like a cohesive picture painting going on here. And I just love it how she just continued to learn and grow herself as an artist and kept pushing herself and learning new things. And I just wanted to show you this. This was actually her postage stamp that was done in 1969. But if you take a look at this painting, and we were just talking about the difference from before and this one. So here we clearly see all the people and the little figural vignettes very up close, and we see all those, but the landscape keeps going back. And if we go back again, we see again how this one is all combined. So we kind of see her, the growth in her artwork, which is just beautiful. So Grandma Moses died in 1961, having enjoyed a 21-year career that was as lengthy and rich as that of many younger artists. Her work has endured, and it can be said in her case that fame and greatness were one. So I hope you have enjoyed this look at naive art and Grandma Moses. It's been a pleasure giving it to you. I wanted to talk for those of you who are going to do the art project. The art project we're actually going to tear paper for the background and kind of recreate a Grandma Moses scene, or you can create one of your own from your own landscape. But so just think about, you can look through her paintings and see if one appeals to you, or come up with one from your own imagination or something that's important to you. So I actually did this one, and this was one of the ones from Hoosick Falls. So we can see the river there and the train. So we're using torn paper here with glue and also oil pastels. So kind of that can kind of fill in some of those details, and we'll just use it right on the paper. So it'll be a lot of fun. I also wanted to show you Linda's. Linda Kallis will be our teacher for this one. And she did obviously a spring scene. I did the winter one. And again, you can just see the same patterns as Grandma Moses had with everything going on. The perspective is a little bit off here. And we actually also have some pre-cut images if you'd like to use those to put on there. But again, using torn paper. And the outside looks like a frame, but that is just oil pastel on the cardboard. So anyway, I look forward to seeing all of you who are at the art project, but thank you all of you for your attention, and I hope you have a great day.